can say definitively that religions are all bullshit.
Welcome to Brainstorm.
We have the explicit tag for a reason.
This is a base level argument to a higher level morality.
I get paid to science.
To science as much as one can science.
What the hell was my point?
Trigger warning. The Brainstorm podcast will criticize your most cherished beliefs. We attack nonsense in all its forms and discuss difficult subjects. If you peddle pseudoscience, supernatural woo, or religious dogma, then this is not your safe place. This is the home of hardcore skepticism.
Hi, and welcome to the Brainstorm Podcast, Skeptic Studio, where we do interviews, major topics, and news related to skepticism and atheism. I'm Cory, and my panel tonight are Lisa.
Hello.
Leo.
Hey there.
And Rene. Hello. With the always amazing Dave doing sound.
I will try to be amazing.
We're here in Roman Empire Studios in Regina, Saskatchewan, and today is January 19th, 2018. Our guest tonight is Marianne Garneau, PhD philosopher. Thanks for joining us tonight.
I'm happy to be here.
So I guess a good place to start is tell us a little bit about yourself. What is your background in philosophy, I guess?
So I did a master's degree in philosophy at the University of Alberta with a specialization in logic, and then just kind of switched streams a little bit and did a PhD in philosophy with a specialization in social and political thought in New York at the New School for Social Research. And I've been doing philosophy for a couple of decades, which mostly is the exercise of learning to think really hard about things that we think about all the time anyway. And I've taught philosophy in 4 or 5 different institutions over the last 15 years or so. And it's just a big part of my life, I guess.
I have known a few philosophers in my time. Are you as fun to argue with as they are?
I thought you were going to say annoying, which I entirely would have validated.
You had to notice the pause.
I'm going to say yes, question mark.
I know there's the meme that goes around where it's like arguing with a philosopher is a lot like wrestling with a pig. After a while, you realize that they enjoy it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
This is so...
It's perverse.
Yeah. So with a specialization in social and political stuff, where does that leave your own views on politics as they are in the, I guess, post-Trump era?
So I usually don't wade in specifically to electoral races and things like that. I'm usually reflecting more about broader trends.
Okay.
Movements and in political thought, trends on the left, trends on the right, trends in the way people talk about politics and the discourse that people have. And my dissertation, which I just finished, was about collective action and how I think that's really the category to think about politics is what happens when a group makes a decision or what happens when a group acts. And I focus on that because I feel like it's something that has disappeared for the most part from the way that people think about politics. You know, we think of politics in terms of elections. And
Right.
when we think of elections, we think of them as horse races. But I'm more interested in sort of the different ways that groups in society gather power, deploy power, and relate to each other.
Interesting.
Okay, wait, first, before I ask more about this, I'm going to ask more about this. Marianne, we are Facebook friends, and I feel like throughout the 2016 presidential election, every other post was about how much you disliked Hillary Clinton until the night of the election, and then you're like, no, wait, no, I want Clinton. So do you want to maybe, are you disentangling your work from your personal, I don't know, political inclinations or inclinations to discuss it. Okay.
So I will cop to that. And the reason was so that, of course, that doesn't make me a Trump supporter. I'm the furthest thing from a Trump supporter. In fact, Trump is the kind of disaster where a friend of mine compared it to grief, where you wake up in the morning and a few seconds elapse before it hits you that like, oh no, this has really happened. And you kind of can't believe it and have to readjust your sense of reality all over again to the fact that this is the new, status quo. Yeah. So, I think Trump is a nightmare. I'm the furthest thing from a Trump supporter. But you're right. I would rail against Clinton for, the entire electoral cycle and then afterwards. And the reason why I did that is because Facebook is a social network. And so the friends that I have on Facebook are all leftists. And in fact, we've come up with our own joking term for this, which is left book. And yes. It's this crazy cacophonous echo chamber where people are kind of roughly on the same side, but you really wouldn't know it by the way that we talk to each other because we're splitting hairs. Freud called this the narcissism of minor differences. And so we spend all our time talking about like how insanely wrong other people on the left are. And so that was, yes, I constantly talked about how, in a nutshell, my beef with Clinton and with stumping for Clinton was that she was not really an alternative to the sort of like, policies that you see on the part of the Republican Party, which always favor the wealthy, which always favor businesses, which don't help out workers, which gut the welfare state, and thirst on the part of the American population for something actually different, because that's why Bernie Sanders' campaign was as successful as it was. Not saying he would have won, but just it was surprising to see somebody who was an open socialist get that much support. I think you saw in things like Occupy a lot of alternatives. And the Clintons, or the Democratic Party, I should say, refused to offer that and instead offered the candidate of Hillary Clinton, who kind of stood for nothing at all. And, so yes, I railed against her. And then the day Trump won, of course, we realized we were living in that nightmare world.
Right.
It was pretty. Are you still waking up every morning with that panic? Oh my God, is it still true? Shit, it's still true. Like, no.
They're less frequent, but every once in a while, every couple of months, I'll be like, holy crap, I can't believe Trump is president. Like when you see that clown on TV and the clown stuff that he does and says. And in fact, it's great because like I'm Canadian, my husband is American. And so I don't have to own this. And I get to kind of just like throw it at him. Like, you guys elected Trump.
Take responsibility for your people.
I was thinking the other day that being Canadian is like there's a part of it that's being smug about the politics here versus the politics in the U.S. And then there's also part of it that's like feeling bad about being smug about politics.
Although in Canada, we do have that wave of people that are like, oh, we'll trade Trump for Trudeau any day.
Oh, God.
It's like, yeah, you guys really don't read the news, do you?
So you said you were...
I wrote this...
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I wrote a long article once about what I think went wrong in Canadian politics back when Harper was still prime minister. And I wrote it for an American audience because Americans love to think of Canadians as these like happy, friendly, wonderful social democracy, neighbors to the north. And I was like, actually, they're literally trashing libraries right now and rescinding environmental protections at an alarming rate. And I kind of blowing the lid off of that to an American audience, and then also describing at length what I thought the origin of that was and the cause of those problems were. And so, Canada has like all kinds of crazy, ugly stuff like the United States does, maybe not to the same extent in certain areas, but we've got our own bananas politics.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
We seem to follow American politics about 5 years later, it seems, roughly.
Well, with Harper, were we following like Bush, or were we like, were we predicting Trump?
I think we were following Bush.
Okay, fine.
Well, if you think about it,
because Harper wasn't as crazy as Trump is.
No, it's still the Canadian kind of
right
reined in, but we had kind of like a slightly smarter Bush in Harper. Now we kind of got Obama in that, he's,
charismatic,
very charismatic and charming, but there's a level of people that absolutely hate him for no reason.
No, they're cynical about him, I think.
Yeah, but now we might end up with Canada's version of Trump. Like we dodged that bullet by not having O'Leary, but I'm still waiting to see what'll happen. Now that I've hijacked the conversation.
Hijack away. Were you going to ask something, Leo?
Oh, yes. What was it? Oh, yeah. So you said that you wrote your thesis on the, I guess, collective group decision-making around politics?
Collective action. Collective action.
So do you see it, the election of Trump and the rise of the kind of racist white supremacy,
the alt-right
within politics, do you see it as a reaction to Obama, or is it actually how people see things? Is it?
Well, that's the thing. You have to be careful about that. The fact that if you look at actual voters and the way that they talk about their voting decisions, they don't describe, wow, finally a white supremacist candidate that I could cast a vote for. That's just not what you hear. Instead, you hear stuff about, it's the usual concerns about jobs, concerns about security, concerns about the border, because people are constantly being told that this is a big existential threat to the United States, right? And so you have to take the election of Trump or Clinton or whoever with a grain of salt. And you have to remember, too, that every political impulse in American society gets distilled down to a sort of either-or choice between two candidates. And those candidates themselves, one of the things we've been learning through this election is kind of like the sausage-making process is that produces the candidates that eventually get presented to the electorate as here's your Democratic option and here's your Republican option. And so I think if you look at actual polls, it's not as though people were waiting for a candidate like Trump or the sort of more wild aspects of him. It's that people are kind of ultimately flipping a coin toss. And it's interesting how many people remain undecided even up into the day of election, or it's interesting how many people who voted for Obama twice voted for Trump this time. And that can be for any number of considerations. And if you look at the way politics is played, they find some wedge issue to really go after people with. In the 80s, it was things like crime and drugs. And now it's stuff like the border and jobs and trade. And they find that issue to scare people into voting for one candidate or another. And then when you actually look at, I also want to be a little bit deflationary about Trump, because even though he's such a nightmare, on Twitter and on TV and in the policies that he's going after, when you look at the net effect of what's really happening, the policy kind of tracks the same trend that's been established for the last 40 or so years. So it's like, oh, what's the big legislative accomplishment so far? A tax cut for the rich. That's shocking, or beefing up law and order and border security. That's a trend that's been going on for 40 years,
What about antagonizing North Korea, though? I mean, that's not a policy decision. It's just sort of happening.
I mean,
but what's interesting about that is you have North and South Korea now setting joint Olympic teams and like being lovey-dovey with each other because, granted, I think it's terrifying that Trump in some sense has his finger on the button for the nukes. But on the other hand, like his tweets are not world policy.
Do you think that North Korea understands that?
Well, look at what North Korea has apparently been doing over the last couple of weeks in terms of reaching out to South Korea, like sending delegations, and a lot of it's symbolic, but that symbolism matters.
Well, yeah, I mean, Twitter is symbolic too. I mean, you say something on Twitter, it's not meaningful. It doesn't have it only has as much meaning as you allow it to have, right? Like,
yeah. So
I mean, I will also say, sorry, I'm talking too much.
No,
we're interviewing you.
You're the guest. That's the point.
Talk.
Well, I have a follow-up question to my earlier question. So you were saying that it's a coin toss between Hillary and Trump, but what fascinates me more is the primary process. So I understand like that two-party system that ends up being like a popularity contest between Republican, Democrat, just who we hate more. But the primary is what really concerned me, where Trump won by such huge margins when there were a whole host of other candidates. So like that's kind of just on the Republican side. How do people like? Does the Republican Party really like him that much?
Not according to Fire and Fury.
Well, not just fire and fury, but like there's been a lot that's come out in terms of people in Trump's own staff and in his own cabinet who can't stand him, people who think he's a moron. But no, he was a nightmare for the Republican Party. And he was not their favored candidate. They wanted to go with like anyone from, Jeb Bush to Marco Rubio to, I forget the names of the other candidates. But no, he's not their guy. And they were forced to sort of align behind him because he won that primary process. Right. But the fact that he won that primary process, again, I wouldn't say that that's so much indicative of how awesome the voters or the Republican Party primary voters think Trump is. I think it's more of an indication of how shitty all the other candidates were.
What do you think of I remember, you don't know if you remember a few months before the election, Michael Moore predicted that Trump would win. And one of the reasons he gave was that the American people like to just give the middle finger to the establishment, right? What do you think about that effect? Yeah.
No, I think that's right. And I think that it accounts for a lot of electoral events in politics. I think it accounts for why the NDP was elected in Alberta, for that matter.
Yeah.
I mean, I lean more left than I lean right, obviously. But like, I'm not going to pretend that wasn't driven by a desire to for change and people being fed up. And same thing with Brexit. Like Britain apparently voted in favor of Brexit just because they're sort of pissed off. And then even the voters who voted in favor of it woke up the next morning being like, oh no, what did we do? Like, we didn't really want Brexit.
Oh, I can't believe that actually won.
Well, wasn't one of the biggest Google searches is what is Brexit?
Yeah. Next morning. You know what? One argument for that I heard later was that in Britain, and we have the same thing in Canada, we have a parliamentary democracy. You're used to voting in your riding or in your area, and then that vote kind of you don't really vote directly for anything, right. But a referendum is really direct democracy. Whatever gets more than 50% wins, right? So people maybe aren't used to having that much power in their vote and not really having their vote count in that way. I mean, that was one argument that I heard after the Brexit vote. I thought was interesting.
I think there's some credence to that. I really do. Like, people are so used to their vote meaning so little. And that's not just true in single member, simple plurality electoral systems like Canada and the UK. It's true in the United States because there's such a distance between politics and people's everyday lives. I think there's some credibility to that argument that, they're not used to their vote actually deciding anything, or they're used to it being so removed from actual policy making that maybe they were a bit cavalier about it. They don't really know how to wield that power.
Well, I don't know. I feel like that's true. Do you think? I'm just wondering to what extent the way that the presidential election in the states is set up affects the final outcome. Like you have certain states that in the primaries that are so crucial. They are the first ones to vote, or and so they really set the tone. And there's some states, if you live in them, it doesn't really matter if you live there. It doesn't matter what your vote is. The candidate will already be decided by the time your primary is happening. Right. I mean, and the same was true with the popular election. If you lived in California, your vote really didn't have much impact, right? It didn't really matter because your votes were going to Clinton.
Because of the way it's set up.
Yeah, I don't know. Do you want to speak to that?
Let me be a bad interviewee and just run in a very different direction with what you just said, which is, you wake up in the morning and you get dressed and go to work and you spend 8 hours a day there. And then you commute home and, you pay your bills and whatever. Speaking of areas of life where you have very little power and very little decision making, and so again, this is why I kind of have a bit of a critical distance from electoral politics in general. One of the biggest things that is my kind of pet issue or soapbox issue is the fact that we spend most of our waking lives at work, which is not only not organized in a democratic way, but is organized in a very authoritarian way, both in terms of the fact that, there's a boss that tells you what to do and when you're fired, but also the fact that you're not allowed to work and to pay your bills and to put a roof over your head and to feed your kids unless you basically find some way of generating profit for somebody in society.
Yeah.
And that's a really messed up thing, and we don't really think about it critically. So, when people say if you live in if you're a Republican living in a blue state, your vote doesn't even matter. Or if you live in the wrong time zone, the election's already been decided. I'm kind of like, yeah, there are bigger forms of disempowerment that I find more interesting.
No, I think you make a really good point. That's totally true. I think what's interesting. So in my line of work, which is really safety oriented, and we actually, so like I work in radiation with radiation therapy. So anything to do with radiation, all the new research is showing that the less hierarchical an organization is, the safer it is. And we actually get a lot of that data from, for example, the airline industry. So basically, we have policies in place that say the lowest person on the totem pole can stop the line. The janitor, if he notices something amiss, can say, no, this isn't safe, we're stopping. And nobody can overrule him until we all get together and say, no, it's fine. Or we all evaluate this and we think about it. So it's interesting that sometimes being more egalitarian and more less hierarchical can be of benefit.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I also think that you could make the argument from a position of justice. You can make it from a position of fairness. But yeah, the fact that it actually delivers better outcomes is true in a lot of cases too.
I mean, don't you think that would also be true even in like HR policy? If you have a place, let's maybe talk about sexual harassment. I was hoping to bring this up with you anyways. I've heard you say really interesting things about this in general. But, if you have a work environment where people feel empowered to say something and you don't have this power differential where you can't say anything if your boss jerks off into a potted plant in front of you. Don't you think that makes a better work environment where you're going to be more productive and when you're going to be less stressed, you're going to be wanting to come to work? I mean, doesn't that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, the fact that there are hierarchies and concentrations of power explains why people are, for example, afraid to come forward with sexual harassment and allegations, as you're saying, and why that kind of thing, and we always have to sort of act surprised as a society or whatever when it happens. But every time we blow the lid off of a Harvey Weinstein, it's like, yeah, and he's got, or Bill Cosby or whatever. Yeah, and he's got like 50, 60, 70 accusers. I mean, think about the fact that this goes on for so long before we finally all find out about it and blow the whistle on it. That's because there are hierarchies and concentrations of power that make it difficult to just outright, call out and stop this behavior.
Are you surprised by these things, Marianne? Or at this point, I'm not. I was surprised with Jian Ghomeshi, and beyond that, I've just been like, yep.
Oh, am I surprised at who's going down?
Not even who, but just that it's happening. Oh, can you believe that men with power are sexually harassing women? It's unbelievable. It's unheard of. Never knew that.
Yeah.
No, I knew. I knew.
Exactly. I don't think any woman is surprised by any of these stories, by the content of these stories, or by the number of people that are being accused. I don't think any woman is surprised by this. The thing that does surprise me, and a friend of mine tried to make this point to me early on. She was like, I think that this is actually kind of a turning point. The number of people that are being outed for this is crazy. And I was like, I don't know. I've been seeing this for the last couple decades. I was skeptical. But I'm starting to kind of agree with her that there's something a little bit different about this instance of just the sea change. I think that it might be opening up a brief historical moment in which, first of all, I think there are a lot of men at home right now, just freaking terrified, shredding papers and deleting emails and whatever. But I also think that
it's kind
of opening a little space.
Oh, that's funny. Because I was thinking, when this week the Aziz Ansari article came up, where a woman was talking about her experiences with him, and it wasn't that he outright raped her, but he was pushing her to do things she kind of seemed to be indicating she didn't want to do, or she thought she was communicating she didn't want to do, and she ended up feeling icky about the whole thing. And I read it and I'm like, oh yeah, that's happened to me. I don't know. I wonder if most women have read things like this, and just, I don't know. It just seems like, yes, that's how it is.
And no, totally. And then two things happen. So here's the thing. Every woman said, yeah, of course, that kind of thing happens. And some of those, 50% of women, let's say, then took that, their next sentence was But like, duh, she should have, been more assertive in the situation, or of course men are like that, or like, don't go back to his place or whatever. And then the other 50% of women said like, and that's why I identify with the article that came out, and I, sympathize with this woman, and this needs to change. So it's really interesting because it seemed to me that everybody kind of agreed on the base facts. Nobody took the story itself and said like, I don't know, I don't think it really went down that way. Everybody kind of recognized the sort of empirical, actual story, but then they kind of diverged as to what they thought the lesson was. Some thought the lesson was, this is why we need to end this culture, the sort of sexual culture that we have. And other people said like, nah, this is just kind of par for the course, whatever. I don't think that this is worth particular attention.
I mean, I personally, I take it definitely. I think it's part of a culture, like this thought that it's not all men, but some men just seem to think like you have to push and push and push. I mean, like I think you were saying earlier this week that it's you should really be giving people space. If you're attracted to them, you should give them space to come to you rather than just constantly being on their case and pushing and pushing and pushing, because that's a much more attractive thing. So I thought that was very interesting. But I also think that we should also empower women to be more assertive. As I'm not saying it's her fault for not saying anything, but I'm saying, we need to socialize our young women and girls to be able to say, no, you can say what you want and what you're comfortable with, and you can set that line, and you don't have to feel bad about it.
I totally agree with you. I mean, it's worth remarking upon that it's so common for women out there to not have the seemingly very basic skill set of articulating when they're uncomfortable, or articulating what they want, or regulating the pace at which like a romantic encounter unfolds, or leaving when they find someone annoying. Like the fact that it's apparently, as common as it is for women to feel that way and to feel sort of like a little bit hostage in a situation like that is itself a fact to be examined and reflected upon. But yeah, the other thing that I went off about on Facebook, which you're referring to, is how I don't mean give people space. It's in that like dumb quote, like if it comes back to you, it's yours, whatever. I mean,
I didn't take it that way.
So yeah, there's a movie called Shame with Michael Fassbender, where it's maybe 4 years old or so, and he plays a sex addict. And I found the portrayal of his character in this movie utterly fascinating. And my line on it is, it's the only time I've ever seen, or the most compelling time I've ever seen, female desire portrayed on screen. So the movie's about him as a sex addict, and all the female characters are incidental characters. And yet it portrayed female desire remarkably well. And the reason why it did that, or the way that it did that, is that Michael Fassbender's character, the way that he gets laid so much, is because he just knows and trusts that there is such a thing as female desire. Women don't need to be like tricked, cajoled, pressured, whatever, into having sex, or like, encouraged, whatever. You finally, because it kind of never happens, create some kind of breathing room and some kind of space for female desire to articulate itself and present itself. Then it will, and it'll like almost like rear its head like intensely, because it's never given space. And so I'll illustrate this with a scene from the movie. He goes to the Standard Hotel, which is in Manhattan in New York, and it's literally straddles the High Line Park. And the High Line Park is like an old abandoned railway that's been turned into a park. Okay. And sorry, should I pause for a second?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So so the High Line Park, that hotel already, the Standard Hotel already has a reputation of being like a place you go for a hookup. Like it's very unambiguous. He goes there with this woman. And in the scene, she's standing and looking out the window. It's famous for sex because it has like floor to ceiling windows. And so people who are both like exhibitionists and voyeurs will sort of like have sex there and also like see other people having sex there. Anyway, she goes and walks over to the window.
It's like a real place. This really happens?
No, this is a real place. This is an actual real place in New York. And so,
sorry.
Like people who live in Saskatchewan have like this.
We're very sheltered.
There's a lot of things go on in the world that I didn't know about.
Windows.
Okay, sorry. Please continue.
This is very, Okay, so the Standard Hotel, floor-to-ceiling windows. He's there with a woman. She walks up to the window and just like gazes outside, or she's standing and gazing outside. And he walks up like next to her, like about 2 feet away from her, and also just starts like gazing outside. And then she puts the moves on him. And like, so he doesn't go up to her. He doesn't try to start taking her clothes off. He doesn't kiss her on the neck. He doesn't make a move. He just stands there next to her, walks up and stands there next to her. And then she like jumps him. And, you know, it's just one of the scenes in the movie that does such a good job of portraying the fact that like this guy got laid because he just let women come to him. And instead, like, there's this sort of like Aziz Ansari, apparently, allegedly, kind of insecure type that's constantly trying to like encourage women and pressure women and like, you know, how do you want me to blank you? And, you know,
but can't you just hear his voice in that article? Yeah, baby, just put him on the camera. Can't you just hear his voice in your head? It's like,
my smart ass nature kicks in and says,
I was like, I don't think it's ever happened in the history of the world that a woman really wanted to give a guy a blowjob and never got around to it. Like,
very rarely.
Well, I'm thinking the difference is also it's Michael Fassbender. You know, a smart ass. You know,
well, but listen, that there's like, yeah, it doesn't hurt. I mean, they cast that role intentionally. It doesn't hurt that he's really good looking, but we've all been around the person who's like not technically that good looking, but they have like a coterie of like people attracted to them because there's something about their personality or whatever.
No, so you recommended that movie. I downloaded it. I watched about half of it earlier this week, and I'd agree with it. It's interesting. You know, and I thought you were going to maybe bring up the dichotomy. He's got his friend who's really, really, really trying hard to hook up with someone, right? And he goes to the bar with him. And his friend's just really trying, you know, all these lines, and these women are they're creeped out, and he just comes in. And
That's awesome. I'd forgot about that.
Right, and he doesn't say much, right? You know, and he just makes eye contact. And, you know, he goes off and his friend goes off and dances, and she's just like not into it, obviously, and he's just kind of standing there watching. And then his friend and him split up at the end of the night, and the woman pulls up and invites him. I was going to say over, but they don't go anywhere. Anyways, but yeah, no. Yeah, so I got your point from that movie. It was very interesting.
Great film. Wonderful film.
Yeah.
Anyway. It's one of my favorites, actually. I'm glad you're talking about it.
I have to finish it. I haven't finished it yet. But yeah. I watch movies now like I read books. Marianne, I don't know if you do this now that you have a child, but it's just like, I don't know. I have like an hour at the end of the night where maybe I can stay awake and then... and it's done.
Yeah, I start books. My entire bookshelf is lined with books with like bookmarks 20 pages in.
Yeah.
And then an inch of dust on them.
Yeah. Pretty much.
I can read articles. I have time for articles.
Yeah. You know,
I read the internet all day long.
I've been trying to do your trick, Cory, of like downloading a good ebook you've been meaning to read, and then like instead of looking at Facebook or whatever, like Reddit on your phone when you have 3 minutes, read a few pages of your book. But I'm still only getting through the book like 2 pages at a time, you know, so it's really not.
Doesn't feel very progressed.
It's okay, but it's, you know, books are hard. It's kind of better if you sit down for at least 15 minutes to half an hour at a time and actually get a chunk. I don't know. That's how I feel.
I agree. It's difficult. But I shared an article today about that from Kate or something about the Aziz Ansari stuff.
Okay.
And it's interesting because it has happened to every woman apparently.
Yeah. Everyone I know.
and I think that in some sense all men can kind of say like, oh, I think I was Aziz at one point. And,
you know, yeah. So I think, you know how I don't know if you agree with me, Marianne, but one reaction that I didn't particularly like coming out of a lot of men with all this, especially with the more extreme stuff, the Harvey Weinstein, et cetera, is like, oh, well, now all the guys seemed really worried. You know what I mean? Like, oh,
right.
People are complaining, like, oh, and I think it was because maybe they're thinking back on their behavior, and I think they're maybe not thinking of their their Harvey Weinstein behavior, but they were probably thinking of their Aziz Ansari behavior. And I think this is like every guy's nightmare. I saw an article where somebody described the article as revenge porn. This woman's trying to get revenge porn on Aziz Ansari, which I don't agree with. But I think some men are interpreting it this way, or maybe people are interpreting it this way.
If we're realistic, I'm sure we've all had our shitty moments. I'm sure we've all had our shitty moments.
I think it's great that guys are willing to like say, you know what, I kind of recognize myself in this Aziz story. Like I recognize like stuff I've done in the past. And I think that it's great that they can come out and say that. And yeah, I think that there's a big difference. And I don't think anybody would really disagree at this point. The Aziz Ansari phenomenon and the Harvey Weinstein phenomenon. Right. And Harvey Weinstein, like Bill Cosby, whoever, is an absolute predator. And he specifically uses, like power and entrapment. And I thought the most compelling case was the Selma Hayek thing that she wrote in the Times about that. I mean, that was incredible. That really showed the monster that he is. And that's why when they get busted, there's like 57 accusers, which I don't think we'll hear in the case of Aziz Ansari, because again, that's not predatorial behavior. That's just like, pressuring or like, goofy, uncouth behavior. But I was going to say, I read an article in The Guardian a couple of years ago on the heels of a lot of the campus rape stories, where somebody actually apparently did a sort of empirical statistical study, and they determined that the people who that something like the vast majority percentage-wise of like harassment and violation gets perpetrated by the same very, very small number or set of people. And I think that that's like really important to know, because I think that I thought that I was skeptical at first, and I found it to be compelling, especially as I read more about it. And it was very clarifying, because on the one hand, you want to be able to say that we have a culture where men are encouraged to kind of like goad women into sex. But on the other hand, you want to be able to distinguish that from predatory behavior. And predatory behavior, I mean, the reality is that like most of the population is not a sociopath in that way and doesn't behave in that way. And it's important to know that, to know how to address it. So when it comes, for example, to something like a guy who assaults another student on a campus, it's important to not handle that in these kind of closed door settings the way that campuses do, because that person, if they face no repercussions and there's secrecy surrounding it, will continue to go on and behave in that predatory way with other people. And in fact, that turns out to be the case often when a student is accused of assault, that like they've done this year after year. So that I found really clarifying.
Do you think that the men who react like defending like whatever the Harvey Weinsteins and the Bill Cosbys, do you think that's like the poor people who continue to vote for the Republicans? Like, one day I could be rich and I want the tax breaks too. Do you know what I mean? Like, one day a woman could accuse me and I want people to send, you know what I mean? Like,
I'll be the one in the powerful position.
Yeah. No, not that they want to be a harasser, but that I think they all feel blindsided. Like, I think even Harvey Weinstein and Bill Cosby felt entitled to what they did, and they don't feel like, I still don't think they think that they did anything wrong.
Absolutely. They don't think they did anything wrong. Like, there's that guy that, I forget his name, but the physician for the U.S. Gymnastics team, who is on trial as we speak. And he just wrote something like a 6-page, single-spaced, handwritten letter to the judge asking for mercy because he finds it too difficult to listen to all of these accusations in court all day. And, like, that's the thing. And this is the thing that Trump has shown us, too. Bullies think they're victims. Bullies think that other people bully them. This was all Trump could talk about when he first came to power, was how unfair people were to him, how unfair other Republicans were to him, or how unfair the media was to him, about what a victim he was of everybody else's bullying. And so, yeah, I don't think that Weinstein or Cosby think that they did anything wrong still. And, we may never be able to convince them that they did, but we have, as a society, have to deal with them. But to get back to your question, like, yeah, I think that there's a sense in which I think part of it might be the idea that it just looms bigger in like your average guy's imagination, that he may end up being accused of something that he didn't do, or he thinks is over exaggerated or whatever, then it looms in his imagination that he might be sexually assaulted. And it's really funny because I one time somebody was telling me how they used to teach a class on what the class was, but at one point they covered the topic of assault, sexual assault. And, they asked the students, male and female, about their attitudes towards it. And then they asked the male students to imagine being like themselves being like sexually violated, like let's say sodomized or something like that. And like all of a sudden, all of their reactions changed, their faces changed. They got more uncomfortable and they were like deeply upset by that. And I was like, well, like what were they imagining the whole time before that? Like just
Right.
the rape of women? Like I found it so interesting that's that simple kind of like caveat or whatever, like completely change their minds or sensitize them or open their eyes or something like that. And so I think that there's a sense, that men walk around when men walk down a dark alley, not really fearing that they're going to be sexually violated. Women do. And so it's partly because I think that looms larger as a threat in their imagination. I also think that it's because I think that like we kind of lack a proper
Empathy?
imagination or resources to describe assault. And I think that there's an overwhelming tendency to think of it as like bad sex.
I think you're right. I think it might just be like it's so hard to empathize because like it's a hard place to go to. You don't want to, just like if somebody loses a child or something, it's hard to even conceive of what that would be like because it hurts too much even to empathize with it. Never mind go through it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. It's hard to articulate what the harm of rape is. Like a professor friend of mine wrote an entire book about rape and torture, and he spent, 400 pages trying to philosophically articulate what the harm of rape is. And I was like, but isn't that kind of obvious? And then I realized like, yeah, but it kind of isn't, or at least not in most people's minds. I think some people can imagine like physical harm and other people, like the pain of a physical injury, and other people can imagine maybe sort of like, I don't know, the sort of like social difficulty or embarrassment or anger or something like that. But it's hard to imagine the real harm. And I think he ended up articulating it in terms of the way that like it really takes your own body and your own sense of your own self and your own sexuality and all these things and like turns them against you and makes you like a prisoner in your own body. And it makes you lose trust in the world. And he used the example, there's a woman who wrote a famous book on rape. Her name is Susan Bryson. I think the book is called Aftermath. And she talks about how like, it's not how after she was violently assaulted, and after she was assaulted, like, she never felt the same way in her skin in the world ever again.
Wow.
Like she couldn't go for a jog anymore, or like it wasn't just walking down dark alleys. It was like she developed this habit where she would still go out for walks, but she every 10th step would do like this sort of pirouette where she'd like turn in a complete circle to see if there's anyone around her or anyone following her. And, just as this manifestation of the way that she was never the same in her own skin again,
That's really interesting and sad.
Yeah.
Honestly.
I don't know. It's I guess a difficult subject for a lot of people. I remember there was an article a while back. There was a story about men being violated in camps in a foreign country. And I recall the men that read this article, like a lot of them would speak of how extremely it affected them. And I think that sort of speaks to what you were talking about with that class, where the same kind of article where women were the victims didn't get the same response from the same people.
Right. I honestly, like, I'm going to tell a really bad joke and then for pedagogical purposes. So here's a joke I heard in Canada, probably like 20 years ago, a couple times, made the rounds. One guy to another, hey, if you woke up in the middle of the woods You guys can just edit this out if it's too bad. If you woke up in the middle of the woods with a greasy asshole and a handful of quarters, would you tell anyone? What? Fuck no. Want to go camping? So, like, the joke, I mean, it's like, it's a really, really blue joke, but the fact that, like, so you're supposed to tell it to someone like a knock-knock joke, and you will invariably get a response from the guy, absolutely not. And that's so telling. Like, that's why the joke works, because you're obviously going to get that response. And that's so telling and so interesting. Like, why wouldn't you? You're a victim. You're the victim of a crime. And I think that itself can kind of orient people's confusion about, like, well, if rape is so widespread a practice, why don't women report it more? If these, like, kind of assaultive encounters or harassment or whatever is such a widespread thing, why don't we hear more about it?
I don't know. The court systems are so good for rape victims. You'd think they'd really, really want to report things that had happened to them. People are so
society's really
everyone
supportive.
believes them. Like, they are not re-traumatized at all.
No, that's right.
It's really just a great system. So justice is always served.
I have to tell the story of this case that happened in New York about like 7 years ago. I ended up getting my picture in the Times because I like made this crazy poster and stood outside in protest at the verdict, but it just said New Rape City. It wasn't that exciting with a picture of these cops. So what happened was these cops, somebody called 911 because this woman was very intoxicated and she was like, I think kind of slumped in the vestibule of her own apartment building. And so the cops came and they helped her up to her apartment. And then one of them stayed behind and raped her. And they had a taped phone conversation in which she got him to admit that he had done that, and they were found not guilty. And like, you can just imagine, you know, the fact that she even put herself through like publicly going to a trial every day and seeing those two guys when she probably just wanted to bury the experience. And they had slam dunk evidence and he was found not guilty. They both were.
And I'm not surprised. See, I mean, like, so that just tells you something, right? Like,
it always reminds me of the Brock Turner situation, right? His dad writes a heartfelt letter about what a good kid he is, and so he gets 6 months and gets to go home after 3, and now he's trying to get it expunged off his record. So.
But anyone with any experience in the justice system will tell you, actually, that's a pretty good win for the
right.
for the I guess the DA in the States, yeah.
It's just well, and the letter that his dad wrote and the statements from his mom weren't like, you know, he did a terrible thing and he's sorry and he served his debt to society and he needs to be given a second chance. Instead, their vocabulary was like, he's been unfairly treated, he's been unfairly maligned, he didn't really do anything that bad. You know, like, again, it's that phenomenon where Harvey Weinstein, Bill Cosby, they will never believe that they are predators.
I know. How can we make them believe, Marianne? Like, how can we do it?
It doesn't matter. We just have to make the rest of society respond appropriately when things like that happen.
Fine.
Change the society around it, right?
Fine.
Yeah.
Fine. Do it the hard way.
I just want, you know, I don't know, it's something in me that wants these people to really see who they are and hate themselves, like, oh, fuck, I did that. Fuck, I'm so bad. I hate myself. Like, I don't know. That's what I want.
But who wants to drug Bill Cosby?
Oh,
a lot of people.
Yeah. I was kind of leaning at the second part of that, but.
Before we run out of time, I do want to ask you briefly about, I know you've done a lot of work with organizing labor. Do you want to speak to that at all, or?
Yeah, so that's putting my money where my mouth is when I say that we spend most of our waking lives at a job over which we have no power or control, and engaged in workplace organizing for like a good long while. Mostly it's been places where I myself have worked. But most recently I was helping out with a campaign in Times Square where there's it's very famous with like tourists and in guidebooks. And it's like a diner where the servers, also sing. So while they wait tables, they also perform and sing like Broadway standards, then pop songs and Disney songs and that kind of thing. And so I work with a union called the Industrial Workers of the World, and they approached us about organizing their workplace because this new management team came in and basically said, like, we're going to shake things up around here. And that meant firing a lot of long-term employees without cause. Like, one woman had a table walk out on her and stiff her the bill. And so she was fired for that. Or they just made things generally worse. There's like a stage, like a really long banquette with a sort of like board in the middle of it that they would get up on and sing. And it was wobbly and unstable, and like somebody fell off and broke his ankle, and the employer denied his workman's comp, which employers can do in the US, which is crazy. And so they were organizing around these kinds of issues, and they've done it entirely with direct action in the workplace. So normally a union campaign involves petitioning for an election, and then if 50% plus one of the workers support joining this union, the union comes in as the sole bargaining agent, representative of those workers, and negotiates a contract with the owners or management. In this case, just whenever they saw an issue that was wrong, they addressed it through direct action. So with that unstable banquette, they just stopped getting up on it until it was stabilized and fixed. And sure enough, in short order, it was stabilized, or they got a brand new stage put in. Or in the case of, they have a bucket that they circulate called a tip bucket every hour or so among the patrons, because they don't actually get paid to sing. They're waiters. In the States, that means you basically don't earn a wage. You live off your tips entirely. But they don't actually get paid to sing. And so they circulate this tip bucket the same way that a busker in the subway would have a bucket in front of them, right? And management took it away one day. And so they marched up to management in the middle of a shift. It was really cute. They sang this song, My Shot, from Hamilton to like get themselves revved up, and like held all these ketchups up into the air and got all the patrons to do the same. And then marched up, like 6 of them just marched off shift and up to a manager and said, we want our tip bucket back in 24 hours. And within like 3 or 4 or 5 hours or something, management was like, all right, you'll have it back. And so it's this different model of organizing that's kind of very immediate and democratic instead of legalistic and bureaucratic. And it works really well.
That's
Interesting.
You'd have to really get a lot of buy-in, right, from the staff. I mean, everyone would have to be on board with this, or a lot. You'd have to have a large number of people on board. You'd have to. You'd have a lot of apathy.
Well, the tip bucket thing, the short answer is yes, but at the same time, like, you can do a tremendous amount. You can. It comes down to your ability to both intimidate management and interrupt workflow. And so, at one point, they had a shift strike where right before the dinner brush, they all walked out. Well, there were 8 people on shift, or 10, or something like that, and it took convincing all 10 of those people. In fact, actually, one held out, and so they convinced 9 of those people. Well, after that, how do you run your restaurant? It was a Saturday night, I think. Like, how are you going to make any money? There's nobody there to serve the food or to sing. And so, and the tip bucket thing, like, yeah, that was only 6 of them, I think, that marched up to that manager. So, that with a little, and the reason why it's so effective is because it's so unusual for the powers that be to be confronted by workers simultaneously, right? We're completely conditioned. If you have a problem with whether it's with your salary or your working conditions or your schedule, you individually, beseech whatever manager is responsible for that. And chances are you're probably going to get turned down, or at best you've got like a 50-50 shot. When several workers approach a boss at the same time, like, it scares the pants off of them. I used to live in a building close to what was then Ground Zero, what's now the new World Trade Center site. And we just basically got like everybody in the building onto an email list, and the landlords hadn't mopped the hallways like literally since 9/11 happened. So we were like, y'all need to come and mop the hallways. And so we sent an email to the property manager, just all CCing each other. And the first thing he said to the person who had sent it was, please don't include the other tenants when you correspond with me. And then the second thing he said was, we'll send somebody on Monday. And he did.
Because he was recognizing the power of your collective voices.
Right.
So do you think you need
Absolutely.
Do you think you need actual organized unions, or can people just act collectively, like on the like do you need, you know what I mean? Do you need it actually to have a name and a charter or whatever? Can you just act collectively?
You can. I mean, I'm not saying there's no place for organized unions. Union density, as they call it, so the percentage of workers in a given workforce, in a given industry or in the workforce in general, has been falling consistently for decades. And that's a bad thing. And the fact that that's happening kind of tells you, like, there's motivated interest behind that trend, right? Like, it's not a good thing for us. And the fact that it's meaningful to, like, companies to make that percentage lower tells you that, like, well, maybe it should be meaningful to us to make it higher.
Yeah.
But you can accomplish a tremendous amount through even a relatively small number of people taking direct action. And, there's there's a tremendous amount of work that goes on to the campaign at the diner in New York that is just like meetings and budgets and minutes and constant outreach and whatever. So it's not as though, like, once in a while, they just sing a tune and march up to the boss. Like, there's a tremendous amount of planning and overall orchestration that goes into something like that. Mm-hmm. And that is kind of a more systematic approach, which I think is somewhat better and more successful than the more bureaucratic approach. But, it's there.
And what do you say to the argument that the union disincentivizes employees? That it, if you ever worked in a union, like I worked in a hospital, and I don't know, maybe 3/4 of the employers are unionized and the rest of us aren't. And there's this thought that, okay, well, so-and-so doesn't care about getting their work done on time because they know they'll never be fired because they're unionized. What do you say to that argument?
You'll always hear that. The fact that you'll always hear that, like, the 50th time you hear it, you're like, yeah, okay.
Can unions go too far, or is it a balance? Or
sorry, say that again.
Can unions go too far? Can you get too cushy in your job? Can it be too hard to fire people? Can that happen?
Let's say that, there are, for example, instances, this is what always gets bandied about in New York and New Jersey, is like the instance of the teacher who's, like, absolutely horrible, but they can't fire him for union reasons. So they put him in what they call the rubber room, which is like an empty room with a bunch of desks in it where professors just kind of, like, sit in detention all day and collect a paycheck, and deny that there are no instances in which workers who are, like, I don't know, whatever, lazy or rule breaking or problematic get protected. But it's a matter of, like, where we think we need to kind of move the needle or set the needle in terms of the trade-off of workers getting fired for having a table walk out on them versus maybe once in a while a lazy person being protected because there's a union. And, like, the first thing I would do is, like, a union person is, like, look into that case. Are they really underperforming? Or if they are lazy, what is the reason? You don't know what goes on in people's lives. Maybe this person is underslept because they're a single parent and they have no help at home with their childcare, like, whatever, right? Like, I'd first look into that situation further and not take, like, management's word for it. But you know what? Fine. Let's say once in a while a lazy worker gets protected. If that's coming or if that's the price for, like, in generally protecting people's ability to, like, protect themselves and feed their families, well, we all got to make sacrifices somewhere.
Well, I was in a workplace a couple of years ago where we had that happened, where there were two guys who were just, you could tell, intentionally not trying to work. And what happened, you actually had other unionized workers, who were their coworkers, including myself, starting to go to management and say, like, these two guys are just sitting around, they're not trying. And they actually did end up getting fired, mainly due to their coworkers turning against them because they were consistently for a couple of years in a row where they just... That's
the thing. If you don't carry your weight, then the people around you aren't going to be very happy with you.
Yeah, so...
Exactly. Like, there's no greater antidote to that or solution to that than, like, peer pressure.
Yep. It's actually quite a common argument that I hear because I work in the oil industry, and everybody's says that, well, of course we shouldn't be unionized because look at the postal industry. Look at those guys. They just sit on their butts all day and don't do anything.
Don't you want to do that?
And I'm like, if that's what results, then let's do it. But no.
Well, it's funny because like I have a very good friend who was a veteran he worked for the Postal Service for I think like 8 or 10 years. And he was involved when there were massive like wildcat strikes and that. And when they were legislated, first locked out and then legislated back to work, which is ironic.
Right.
And, that was a massive union busting effort. And the whole time, the government's line was that, like, we have this, crisis in the post office where it's not profitable and, like, it's a drag on, on the entire country. And that the whole time, that was a lie. It always turned a profit. It usually turned a profit at an increasing rate year over year. And it was just a prelude to union busting and then perhaps ultimately privatizing the post office. And the history of privatizations does not usually end very well for either the worker or the consumer. And the thing about unions is that, like, when you have a certain amount of unionized workforce, especially with a really big employer like the post office or with public employees in general or with a large part of an industry in general, it raises the floor for everybody. It raises wages. It increases or improves health and safety standards. Like, it really raises the floor for everybody. And so there's this game that the bosses get us to play all the time, which is look to your left at that, lazy dirtbag union worker and attack him, as opposed to looking up at the person who is, paying you year after year or whatever. It's like what's that meme that I've seen where it's like the billionaire business owner is pointing at like the one slice of pie that's left after like he's taken 7/8 of it and saying, careful, that immigrant wants to like take part of your slice or something like that. I mean, it's just absurd. Right. And as long as we keep like punching down or punching laterally that way, like that's a game in which we stand to lose, you know.
That's interesting.
I think that's a good place to stop this portion of the episode. Thank you very much for joining us. Do you have anything online where people can find your stuff, or are you a Twitterer?
I sadly have nothing to promote right now. And in fact, my husband is very annoyed with me because he's like, you need to start a website where you put all your stupid articles and your hot takes that you have something to point people to, but I haven't yet done that. So
well, you're a little busy. So raising a child, saving the world, getting a PhD. So we'll forgive you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for the opportunity, guys.
It was a great conversation.
Yeah, I enjoyed myself a lot.
All right. Let's go to a commercial and hit that goodbye button.
Bye, Marianne.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks.
If you like what we're doing and want to help us keep the lights on, go become a patron at patreon.com/brainstorm podcast. You can hear the bonus half hour that we record every episode and get a shout out when you support the show. Become a patron for just $1 an episode at patreon.com/brainstorm podcast. Or you can support the show by ordering a t-shirt, mug or other gear from our store at caffeepress.ca/brainstorm podcast gear. If you can't afford to become a patron or buy gear, then why not give us a rating or write a review on iTunes or Stitcher? Every rating makes it easier for people to find us. Thanks for your support.
Tired of living in a culture of lies, fake news, and alternative facts? The Pro-Truth Pledge reverses the tide of lies by calling on politicians and everyone else to commit to truth-oriented behaviors. Take the pledge at protruthpledge.org.
What's up, secular minorities? This is Uber47, host of the Secular Barbershop Podcast, a podcast run by a secularist of color for secularists of all colors. I invite you to come in, relax, and listen in on a conversation that changes every week in a secular environment. And, like every barbershop, walk-ins are welcome. Talk to you soon.
Okay, so we're back. I guess it was kind of nice to have a little bit of conversation about unions on the show. That's not something we actually touch on very much. I quite like that conversation.
Maybe it's a good thing Gumby's not here. I know he's very anti-union.
Yeah,
Gumby's anti-union.
He's one of the guys who says they had a time and a place in the past.
I don't agree with him. I think unions do have a place. Do they get kind of abused? They're just like fucking everything. Of course it happens.
Yeah, that's right.
They're a necessary evil, as Bain says.
As Bain says.
Yeah, I was at my workplace, which will remain unnamed for now. There was a union busting effort.
Is that right?
Not too long ago. It pretty recently got settled. The labor board ruled in the employees' favor, but that kind of shit, nobody gave a shit about the union before they started busting it. As soon as the union busting started, everybody was on board, and then all of a sudden they just reignited the union. Nobody.
Fucked up.
there were pretty much no employees that had ever even read the contract before.
Is that right?
And as soon as the union busted starting, then everybody read the contract, and then they started demanding the shit that was in the contract, which people had hadn't demanded in years. You know, it's like, oh, this shit's in here. We get all these benefits.
You have no idea how funny I find that.
Yes. Shit. That's pretty good.
But,
talk about backfire.
Yeah. Because in the oil industry, we get paid pretty well, even though we don't necessarily deserve it. I always kind of have been of the opinion that if every industry paid as well as we do, then of course there wouldn't be no need for unions. But that sort of thing doesn't happen. Like, most employers don't just pay employees fair wages because they want to.
And
I'll tell a story, maybe not on air.
Okay.
But the thing about the union, so it's not as much about wage as it is about other things. So when it comes to all this shit that businesses start to pull, where they we're going to put you to work 34 and a half hours a week, not full time, so then we can cut all these benefits from you. Like, we don't have to give you time off. And that's actually more money's worth than, because if you're a good employee, in most places you can kind of demand I'm pulling my weight here, pay me more, or I'm going to go somewhere else.
Right.
But they start just hacking away at some of these other things. Like, we're just going to give you fewer vacation days, and then reduce your hours just below full time and that kind of shit. Where you have a union, they put it in the contract that they can't. They have to hire full time employees.
Yeah,
and then, so I see that as maybe even more of an issue than just the wage,
right?
In a lot of places.
Yeah, no, that's right. I know there's plenty of grocery stores that in the past have kept their employees below a certain hour threshold, and
that ends up costing, because benefits for full-time employees, that's a shitload of money. Yeah. Like, if they have to cover your healthcare coverage and giving you 15 days vacation or whatever it is now. And a lot of people don't know about it. If you get hired by Walmart or something, if you're not very familiar with labor law and stuff, you might not even know what benefits they should be giving you.
Right.
And as long as you don't demand them, if there's no union that informs you, they should actually be giving you this. A lot of people, they just don't know. And they get away with all kinds of shit.
I don't know. I think unions, it kind of depends on the place and the size, if they're good. But historically, and I've seen this argument many times, that historically unions are why you had decent middle class up until the 70s, where they started killing unions.
That's right.
And there's people that go so far as to the whole success of kind of the air quotes developed countries or the industrialized countries. A whole lot of that is largely due to unions, because if you had all the working class rise up and not in a revolution sense as in Russia, or in the Soviet Union, but you just had them going to unions and then all of a sudden scaring the bosses shitless.
Yeah, just being like, nah, we're not going to work today.
but then again, that's the problem is that if people go on strike and everyone thinks strike is, oh, you're just being a lazy piece of shit.
That's right. Yeah. But that's the propaganda that's been pushed for so long now that it is like I used to be one of those conservative guys who'd be like, oh, look at those fucking strikers. They're just not doing their job. They should let somebody do that job then.
And there's,
I mean,
I think it's Cupid that had a very nice, I'm pretty sure it's Cupid, a mug that they had that says something, do you like your 8-hour days?
Thank a union.
Thank a union.
Yeah.
And a lot of those things, the people now, they take a lot of that shit for granted. Like, oh, yeah, I don't work on Saturdays and Sundays. It's like, who works on Saturdays and Sundays? And that used to not be a thing. That's you worked 7 days a week.
Weekends weren't a thing. It's an interesting topic anyway. Maybe someday we can, I don't know, come with some links and some research and talk about it.
Maybe I'll prepare a little something for a political
segment.
Yeah,
perfect.
Something a little bit more specific to drill into.
So I guess one of the things I wanted to do for this part of the show was just to kind of go over some of the stuff from the last year, because we didn't do it last time.
We didn't do our like everyone else does in their
year-end review. Well, because we didn't do a show near the end of the year.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I'll just summarize it for us. We were fucking awesome.
we kind of were. We put out a ton of content. We did a lot of great interviews. I kind of went through every episode, but some of them are obviously more standout than others. Despite all the guests being good, some interviews just went better than others.
And we had, even like with the interview, both the interviews and the topics that we normally talk about, I feel like we had a better diversity than the year before.
Yeah.
Like I felt like it's starting to kind of spread out a little bit more. And
yeah, we're not quite so limited to standard skeptical topics, I guess you could say, because I know Gumby, again, he likes skepticism to be within skepticism, but I personally like to apply skepticism to all the things.
Yeah. Well, speaking of
not that he would disagree with that, but
it's Gumby. Yeah, he would.
Well, I'm gonna plug a show here. I actually listened to the podcast today. I'm gonna fuck up this title now. Life, the Universe, and Everything Else.
Oh yeah.
They did their newest episode about
conspiracy theories,
and then the opening was, we can be skeptics, and sometimes we're too skeptical, and sometimes not skeptical enough.
Yeah.
So, some of the conspiracies are actually conspiracies. There are people conspiring behind closed doors to fuck with other people.
Yeah.
And that episode, definitely worth listening to.
Yeah, I was going to give them a bit of a shout out today too, because that was such a good episode. I just listened to that yesterday, and it's a great show put on by the Winnipeg Skeptics.
Have we had them on?
We have not. I contacted them to come on this year, but we haven't figured out a date yet.
Because I was listening to the podcast today. I was like, I should ask Cory. Like they haven't been on since I've been on the show, but that's been like a bit over 2 years now.
Yeah.
But I was like, I'm not sure if they've been on before.
No, yeah, we've never had them on, but it's definitely in the works. I want to, I guess, thank everybody who came onto the show over the last year. Like, we started off, our first guest of last year was Jeremiah Traeger, and I guess that wasn't really we didn't have a guided kind of idea about what we were going to talk about for that episode, or for that interview, but he did well, and I think Lisa was here, so obviously they did science talk. And And then we had Thomas Smith, who has kind of just blown up this year with Serious Inquiries Only and Opening Arguments, because he was at the Mythicist Milwaukee conference, which was a big thing within the skeptic and atheist community. And so he's kind of become almost like the leftist superstar for atheist podcasting now. Then we had Darren McKee from the Reality Check podcast, and we talked about effective altruism, and that was a good interview. I haven't listened to their show in a little while, so I'm not sure where things are, but I'm sure they're doing a good job of tackling modern skeptical topics. And then in late February, it was me, Rene, and Lisa just at Lisa's apartment and not in studio. And we interviewed Ross Balch, and the battery on my laptop died. So that was fun. And then actually in February, I did that debate with Ed Smith from the Wayward Atheists on no platforming. And then we had Marissa McCool to talk social justice. Then we had the Wayward Atheists to complain about Justin Trudeau. Then we had the science enthusiasts, Natalie and Dan. Justin Bender was in studio with us. And then Carlos Sulkin was in studio, and we talked female circumcision. And that was one of the highlights of the year, I think.
I said that at supper, where I'm like, I'm a little biased because he was one of my props, but I thought that was definitely thought that was one of our better ones. So.
Yeah, it was definitely one of the interviews where like it flowed so well, and the conversation, it made everybody kind of think more, and like it was a really good skeptical kind of,
because it was different than our usual thing. Like it was definitely a different attack, I was going to say attack, but that's wrong. But different approach, different angle. Like it was,
yeah. And then we had Amy Tudor on the Skeptical OB.
That was my favorite.
That was your favorite,
but I didn't go to the FGM one, so
you missed that one.
I missed it. It's not like I can listen to them after or anything like that.
No, they're
that
gone. That
functionality
forever.
doesn't exist, does it?
Yeah, they're just gone.
Dust in the wind, dust in the wind.
I thought so.
You can't possibly listen. And then we had, then the next one was again, we had a full crew but at your apartment.
Oh, yeah. That's right.
That was.
I like my apartment because I have all my wine there, so it works for me.
Yeah.
Where the hell did I go?
Yeah, I'm not sure
you
where
were moving, or something was broken, or you were out of town. Were you at a film festival?
I think you were out of town.
Was that when I was in Yorkton?
Maybe.
Could be.
Yeah.
We had to soldier on without you.
I know I was really sick for a while too, but.
That was one that made me appreciate the work that you do. Because trying to mix and render 6 tracks all together was a fucking nightmare.
That's what I was fishing for compliments there. So thank you. No, I'm just kidding.
But seriously though.
Never leave us.
We love you, Dave.
Yeah, that's
Thank
right. Then we had Karen Garst, the Faithless Feminist, which was another good one. And actually, her book, Women Beyond Belief, kicked off or inspired the Women Beyond Belief podcast, which Angela was just a guest on, I think, last month.
I love Angela.
She's pretty awesome.
I didn't know.
I texted her yesterday. She texted me back.
Okay.
You want me to tell you that story again? Like slower this time?
Very, very, very good story. And then we had Callie Wright, and we talked about her side project and Star Trek. And I think you were there for that one.
I feel like I'm remembering this. Yes.
And then we had David Madison on to talk about 10 tough problems with Christian belief. That was fun. Gleb Sipersky to talk about the pro-truth pledge. I talked to Chris Watson. That was the Fuck Everybody episode. That was fun.
Oh, I missed that one. I was sad again. Sorry I can never ever hear it.
That was kind of my idea because I can't remember what this.
All the bitching online.
Yeah, all the bitching online. Yeah,
was that where his love for Angela started?
No, his love for Angela started like even a year ago.
Oh yeah, I guess it was before that.
That's right. He really likes her. Not as much as Lisa, but
sorry to make.
Why am I feeling jealousy? Like stabs of jealousy here.
Love triangles in the brainstorm podcast.
Yeah. And then we did the ladies takeover brainstorm episode. Oh, where you and Angela were in charge.
Oh my God, it was so much work. Again, now we know all the work you do. And we're just like it took us like 4 hours to choose like 3 songs. Or I think we ended up choosing like 5 because we couldn't
narrow it
They were
down.
way too long, and we're sorry. We did our best.
And that's all right. When we interviewed our top patron at the time, Will Driver.
Oh yeah, he was a great interview. Actually,
Yeah, actually, it was a good conversation. And actually, I emailed him a little while ago just to see how he was doing because I hadn't heard from him in a while. So sounds like he's doing okay. I got an email back the other day.
Good.
Then in that same episode, we talked to Ian Bushfield about the All Trials project.
That was interesting.
Yep. Then we did the Packard PokeSat team up with Brainstorm.
Oh yeah,
that was okay. It was good. I like the Packard show, but I don't know that our team up went as well as it could have. There was some sound issues and some connection issues, but next time we'll get it figured out.
I think they had like 3 different people or something through one Skype or something. I don't know. Wasn't it something like that?
Oh,
something like that.
Yeah, it was just chaos.
And ultimately, like 2 of them were never talking or something.
Yeah, they kind of got silenced.
But they couldn't.
Yeah, the connection never really went through properly.
It wasn't functioning. Yeah.
So that was that one. And then right around that time in September, I started the Skeptic Voices project where I interviewed Trav Mamone and started doing every month or every second month, just interviewing people for fun to get to know them as people instead of as skeptical issues and their views on skepticism. Instead of learn about their life and likes and dislikes and whatnot. You know, the way you make regular friends.
Weird. I thought you make friends by like making fun of goop. Like that's typical.
That's one
That's
way.
what I do.
That's one way. Yeah. And then we had Matt Dillahunty on, which was cool.
That was. I honestly, I've never heard of any of our guests before they come on, except for Amy Tudor. Right. But he was like, he kind of rings familiar, and then I realized he's like, this huge guy.
He's the atheist debates guy.
Yeah, he's a big guy. So I don't mean physically. I have no idea, but he was okay. I don't know.
We had to wind him up a little bit.
We did.
Yeah. But once you got him going,
I don't think he appreciated my my Sam Harris fervor. I was like, oh my God, you get to debate with me! I'm so excited for you. He was just like,
nobody really appreciates it as much as you do.
You're the only Sam Harris fangirl.
Dustin, you're not a fangirl for Sam Harris, Rene?
No.
Dustin likes it. Dustin laughs at all my Sam Harris
that's true.
jokes.
He does. In October, I did 2 extra episodes that month. So like we did our 4 or our 2 or whatever. And then I also did 2 interviews outside of that. We had Deb McTaggart on the show.
Wait, are we only in October?
Yes.
Holy shit, we're busy. Sorry,
Yeah,
continue.
that's right. We do a lot.
Sorry.
We had Deb McTaggart from the Beyond the Trailer Park podcast. And that same episode, Idella was in with us. Oh, I forgot to mention back in July, I think it was, that was Bassett's first episode. Back in July-ish.
Is it that long ago?
Yeah. Yeah, time goes fast.
Time?
Yeah. Yeah, who else? Idella was in here in October to talk about the SSA. And actually, I talked to her. She's going to check with the SSA, see if any other students would be interested in coming to the studio sometime.
What's an SSA?
Student Secular Alliance.
Is that a U of R thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a Secular Student Alliance, isn't it?
Well, I think they have to do the other way because the the Secular Student Alliance is already a taken name type thing.
Oh, okay.
So they had to do the other Student Secular Alliance or something like that.
The People's Front of Judea versus the Judean People's Front.
That's right.
Is that what we're talking about here?
Sorry to derail, but that's what we do. Though when I worked at the National Research Council, the department I worked for used to be called Time and Frequency, and then all the departments got rescheduled or restructured. So then they got renamed Frequency and Time. And I'm not fucking kidding. Like, that actually happened. So I was like, oh, I work for Time and Frequency. No. Now it's Frequency and Time. Okay.
Damn it, gonna have to change all the letterheads.
That happened at my job too, but I'm not going to say it because
it's worth it to work on atomic
I shouldn't
clocks.
name my workplace.
Oh, okay.
I recently found out that you can be fired from your job if they disagree with you politically.
Oh, wow.
And I'm a lefty who works in the oil field.
But why would you be able to be fired from your job if you disagree with you politically?
Because political affiliation is not a protected class.
Interesting.
They can't fire you for supporting a political party, but if you go to work and you have promoted ideas that they don't like, then they can say you are an issue.
Wow.
But just do this. Make it a religious thing. No,
that's right.
You can make a very coherent argument about it. You know,
that's true.
This is my secular humanism. You know, this is what it's all about.
Flying spaghetti monster.
That's fair. Yeah. That's that's a good idea.
We're trying to prevent you from getting canned, Cory. We need you.
I kind of feel like I won't get canned, but I mean, I'll just not name my company just in case.
just keep that in your back pocket if it ever comes to it.
Yeah. So in October, I talked to Leslie Mayer about her documentary, Losing Our Religion. I never did get to see that. It was playing at the Regina Public Library, but I don't know.
Were you going to your job or something stupid?
I was going to my damn job.
Which is where? No.
Yeah. Then we had Jonathan Ariola on to talk about free will.
That was the best one.
It was fun.
Not the best. No, Amy Tudor's best, but he's really good.
And then I talked to Stephanie Zvan about sexual harassment in the atheist community. And then in the same month, we had Rob Ray from Secular Yakking on to talk about the original Motto project. The Secular Yakking podcast is actually ending. They are no longer going to be doing shows.
No more yakking?
No more yakking.
Are they cowing? Are they oxing?
They are focusing on the original Motto project. Yeah. Yeah, so now on November, what did I have? Yeesh. This is also the first year that we didn't miss a single week of putting out an episode. We actually produced 60 episodes for the Brainstorm feed this year.
Honestly, Cory, I don't really feel like I should be like, oh, well, good for me. It was all you. Well, good job. And you and Dave, that's it. Good job.
I feel like we as a team did this.
I showed up and talked into a mic once in a while when it was convenient for me. So good job, Cory.
I would just want to say, if there are listeners, and I think we do have some, you should send Cory an email thanking him for it.
You should. Give him something.
Little smiley face, a little emoji.
A little emoji, yeah.
No dick pics, please.
And then sign up for Patreon.
I think people should be allowed to express their thanks however they want. Dick pics, whatever.
Cory wants your dick pics.
Or at
Only
the very
okay
least,
with them going on Facebook.
or at the very least, an eggplant emoji.
A little bit of a few drops of water.
Yeah. Great.
Water. Sorry.
Does that count as solicited?
God, we derail easy.
Who was it? I just a couple of weeks ago, I was talking to somebody who didn't know what an eggplant was. I can't remember who it was. I have no clue.
Like, didn't know what the emoji meant?
No,
didn't know what the vegetable was?
Didn't know what an eggplant was.
Did not know that such a thing exists.
And so I was like, that emoji, that purple one that is often used as a phallic thing? Yeah. I'm like, that's an eggplant. and it was very, very surreal. Just like, I just reverse explained something here. An emoji to explain the real thing. This is very, very, very weird.
That's hilarious.
If that person is listening, I don't remember who it was. So.
Lachlan is thanking Cory in the chat room right now.
You're welcome, Lachlan.
And his dick pic has been sent. So.
Yeah. It's a Polaroid sent in the mail.
It's actually sticky.
Okay, back up.
I can't help it.
Okay,
Sorry, Lachlan.
Also in November, we had Mike Smith from the Poorly Summarized podcast on, and Aaron and GW from Embrace the Void.
That was fun.
And then in our last studio interview in December, we had Zach Law on, and I wasn't here, so it was awkward and weird.
No, it was because Dustin hosted. It wasn't. We just insulted you every. No, he did. He had a jibe in at you.
Yeah, no, there was quite a few of those, but there was also a lot of dead air.
Well, but we're not good at shit, and it was only the three of us. We did our best.
It's one of those things where you're supposed to have the intelligent questions. We're just supposed to make the smart ass comments.
Again, we just
when
show
all
up.
we have is the smart ass comments.
Destin. He forgot to do the outro. It's fucking written down.
Yeah, that's right. It's right fucking there. Yeah. And then before the end of the year, I did a quick interview with Jason Bloomberg about Bitcoin.
Oh yeah, that was supposed to be really good. I should listen to that one too.
I watched that documentary on Netflix about Bitcoin. Yeah. Still don't have a fucking clue what Bitcoin is.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
What's the thing called on Netflix?
Banking on Bitcoin.
Yeah, banking on Bitcoin. Yeah,
which I didn't know until after I named the episode that I put out, and I was like, so now it looks like I'm talking about the movie because I titled it "The Trouble with Banking on Bitcoin."
Oh.
So
people thought it was a review of the movie and they listened to it. This is shit. You get a lot of hate mail.
Movie review or something. The problems with banking.
No,
sounds like
this isn't a documentary review. This is an actual problem with literally banking on Bitcoin.
Sounds like you're doing your version of Stephen Molyneux.
Right.
Did you get hate mail?
No hate mail.
Doesn't matter.
I was hoping, but apparently that was no more popular than any other episode we do. So.
Hey, if we didn't get the hate mail for the female circumcision.
Yeah, that's true. And then finally, as I was going out on the end of the year, I did a conversation / interview with an anti-feminist who goes by the title or name Morally Gray. And it was not very productive, I guess you could say. It was a good conversation in a sense that we were both polite to each other.
Well, you know what? You're doing better than a lot of people who don't get along in that case. I mean, really.
Yeah.
You don't agree. You know what I mean?
It didn't devolve into name calling.
It didn't devolve into name calling.
But his poor white feelings were hurt.
That's true.
Yeah.
And I couldn't explain to him why he was wrong for having those hurt feelings in such a way that he would accept it. So,
but I think it goes back to the fact it just kind of demonstrates people don't. There's lots of studies that say that we make up our minds about things on an intuitive, emotional level, and then we use our cognitive brains to backtrack and fill in. Oh well, the reason I thought this and that was because of this, that, and the other thing.
Right.
But I don't know. You just.
The mind is already made up, really.
Right. Yeah. That's what we do. So it's just very hard to change. You have to do it on an emotional level, I think, to change people's minds. You have to.
No, that's fair.
That's my person. Yeah.
No, I think the evidence backs you up on that. I think our former guest, Gleb, would agree.
And see, I think that makes sense at a cognitive level, but I'd already decided that I was right.
Right. Exactly. All right, so we're going to go to a music break. For live listeners and patrons, you can enjoy the next few minutes, and then we'll be back. For regular feed subscribers, this is where we'll end the Skeptic Studio. Remember to check out the Shift to Reason Radio next week to hear listener feedback, new patrons.
Some of it.
I knew it would because it had to switch channels to Spike for the second season. So.
And Spike is done.
That's where it goes to die.
Yeah. So, and the last song is This Is the Day by the Cranberries because Dolores O'Riordan died this past week at the age of 46.
And did you hear the cause?
No, I did not.
Overdose.
Is that right?
Yeah, fentanyl poisoning or something. I don't know.
Unfortunately, not that surprised.
And Tom Petty as well, same thing.
Jeez,
He had an accidental overdose. Yeah.
Wow.
Have you had a heart attack or something?
Because of an accidental overdose.
I guess that'll do her.
Yeah, that'll do it.
Damn.
People, don't OD on your drugs, please.
Yeah.
Stop it.
Use drugs responsibly.
Hey, if Nikki Sixx can somehow survive it.
Maybe don't use fentanyl at all. I mean, like some drugs, but maybe don't fuck around with fentanyl, please.
Yeah. Maybe don't do that.
I did it when I was in labor. It was very short term. Did fuck all, too. Anyway, sorry.
All right. Music break.
Music.
You can check out the show notes at thebrainstormpodcast.com and our website, brainstormblog.net. Thanks to our financial supporters, the Utah Outcasts, Bassett, Will, Aaron, Daryl, Destin Sucks, Lachlan, Lisa, Magnus, Michael, Nathan, Positively Skeptical, Rob, and Stephanie. If you want to join them and help the show grow, then you can do that at patreon.com/brainstormpodcast. You can join us every second week when we broadcast live on brainstormradio.net. Our next show is on February 2nd, and our guests will be Matt and Phil from the Semi-Intellectual Musings podcast. Thanks to Marianne Garneau for joining us. Thanks to Dave for our intro music. Thanks to Alex Capper-Murdoch for doing the voiceover for the intro and some of our ads. And thanks to Jason Camo for our outro music. You can find his stuff at aloststateofmind.com. All music played is either with permission or under the SOCAN license to play. For more information on SOCAN, you can check out the music license info page on our website, brainstormblog.net. Remember to give us a rating, a thumbs up, or a fave on your podcatcher of choice. Join our Facebook group, like our page, follow us on Twitter, share the show, and spread the word. For live listeners, stick around for the after show. Maybe somebody will be here. We'll see. You can go to brainstormafterhours.com and listen to the bonus content before it goes patron only. Thanks for listening, and remember, the truth matters.
This is an opinion-based podcast. Each person on the podcast is responsible for their own opinions, and those opinions don't necessarily reflect the views of the rest of the panel, any guests, or anyone associated with the people on the podcast, such as spouses, partners, children, other family members, friends, or employers. No one person speaks for the podcast with the possible exception of Cory, and he doesn't speak for anyone else on the show. The Brainstorm podcast does not represent the views of our sponsors.
We just wanted to say thanks to everyone who listens to us, shares the show, gives us a rating on iTunes or Stitcher, or supports us through Patreon and Gumroad. We don't have a lot of interactions with our listeners, but what we have had proves that we attract some of the best people around. Smart, kind, and cool. An audience truly worthy of the titles hardcore and woo-free. Thanks for helping us make the world a smarter place.